Welcome to HarmonyTALK, a podcast about dreamers and doers. Here, people from all walks of life tell us about their dreams, how they fulfilled them, and the moment they knew there was no turning back. This podcast is sponsored by A.M. Skyer, a third-generation family insurance business started in 1920. Happy to be your guest host today. I'm Todd Stevens. Today, I'm joined by an entrepreneur who's known for helping mold young people into better humans through his involvement in the children's camp industry. He also serves as chair of Hillel International and has served on the boards of Randolph-Macon College, the National Ramah Commission, and the American Camp Association, just to name a few. If that wasn't enough, he's a distinguished scholar specializing in European history. Skip Vichness is a visionary philanthropist, community servant, and a terrific human himself. Skip, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Todd. It's a pleasure to be here.
And thank you for hosting us in your home here in Manhattan.
My pleasure.
So if anyone hears some background noise, we're enjoying just a beautiful day here in Lower Manhattan. Skip, you've been living out every child's dream of spending life at camp, if you will. You've been able to do it for 45 years. Why is camp such an important part of young people's upbringing?
For me, who did not go to camp as a child, that opportunity to engage with camp as a young adult, I think I realized right from the start that this artificially created world is an incredibly positive place to transmit values, relationships in a way that almost no place else does. It takes kids out of all the things that they're used to, their parents, their support system, and gives them that opportunity to be who they are with other people. We always say, kiddingly, but it's true, camp provides memories that last a lifetime.
Which we all need, which is a terrific, terrific way to kind of bring someone into life, so to speak, at that young age. Now, you were born in New York, but raised in Newport News, Virginia, which is a great transition. What really created your sense of purpose as a young person yourself?
I think two things. I mean, first of all, of course, I think my parents very much felt for me that my father used to say, you weren't put on this earth just to take up space, do something with your life. And also that sense of community that comes from a small town and being known in that small town and having the expectations of being a small town person. My parents were both community and civic leaders, so we were known in town. And I think that built for me that sense of responsibility to do things and to be involved in things. I always was in high school as well as when I went away to college.
And you were born Samuel Vichness. Where did Skip come from?
Who knows? But the story is that my grandmother, when I came home from the hospital, I had this habit of laying in the crib with my finger up in the air, and then my grandmother said he looks just like the skipper of a ship. Until I graduated high school, it was skipper, not skip. Oh. There's only one problem with that story, Todd. My grandmother did not speak English. There is no way she knew what the skipper of a ship was. But, you know, everyone who would know the answer is no longer with us. I love my grandmother, so I go with that story.
That enters family folklore at this point, right?
That is definitely it.
You entered college in Virginia. You went to Randolph-Macon College and then went on to Florida State to pursue a PhD in European history. The French Revolution, I believe, was your expertise, correct?
French Revolution, Napoleon, yes.
And what in the world interested you in that period of time in that area of study?
I wish I could tell you I had a compelling interest when I started in French Revolution, Napoleon. I had a compelling interest in going to graduate school in history. I had a compelling interest in spending time in Europe. Both those things really were for me. I did not want to be a lawyer, which seemed to be what everybody else I knew and all my cousins were going to be, and my sister ended up being. And I needed financial support to make those dreams happen. And it just so happened that the best financial package I got was from a wonderful professor at Florida State who was creating an institute for the study of Napoleon and the French Revolution and was looking for students and thought I would be a good addition. And I did fall in love with the topic, I think particularly because in the late 60s, early 70s, the issue of revolution was a very current one in our society as we were experiencing Vietnam, assassinations, that idea of what makes a revolution and what is society is something that did end up interesting me very much.
And education important in your family, would you say?
You know, my family, my father valued education. He wanted both his children to be educated, which for him meant he wanted us to go to private liberal arts colleges, understanding that when we graduated, we would be qualified to basically do nothing but go on. which I think was his expectation. I did a PhD. My sister went to law school. But my father, Friday night dinners at our table, as some of my fraternity brothers who remember going with me, could very well be an examination, much like the one I had when I got my PhD. What were we studying? Why was it important? And my father, although he was an engineer, had a broad depth of knowledge, and he wanted that for his children. He wanted us to be educated. And somehow he seemed to have achieved his goal.
And did he pass on that motivation to you and through your family as time went on?
For sure. I always loved to read. I wasn't always the best student in the world. I tell people I'm basically lazy. I only do the things that I really like to do, the subjects that I like to study. So once I reached the point where I didn't have to take science and math, my academic career became much better. I was always a tremendous reader, both of literature and history, and am to this day.
Would you say there's a path for everyone then, if you have an interest or at least a direction?
I think life is all about passion, about pursuing your passions, right? Whatever they happen to be, and without sort of a sense of how it's going to work out. But for me, at any rate, those passions that I've had, whether it's creating worlds for children, camp, academia, reading, history, community, have really shaped who I am. And I feel passionate about the things that I feel passionate about. And I will tell you, it's hard to get me to focus on things that I don't feel passionate about.
Well, one of those things obviously is camp, as you mentioned. Even though you own summer camps and children's camps, you never actually went to camp yourself.
No one I knew of in Newport News went to camp. Newport News was a small town. You were thrown out in the morning. My mother used to say, don't come back until lunchtime and then don't come back till dinner. And we spent the summers either on the basketball court or in the swimming pool.
Great way to grow up.
It was terrific for us and formed some really close friendships that have survived to this day.
And the camp experience, it came to you a little later in life, perhaps, than many. Can you tell us how your first exposure to camp came about?
My freshman year in college, I went home and my father said, you can't work during the school year, but you have to earn your spending money during the summer. He had a friend who was president of a bank, and I ended up working in the bank that summer, filing checks. If people remember, they used to hand file your checks.
Sure.
It was as close to death as you could get. And I went back to college, and two of my fraternity brothers had worked in camps for the summer. And I said, geez, that sounds really great. And I was a basketball player and a swimmer. So I filled out an application. At that time, the American Camping Association had like a clearinghouse. And all of a sudden, people started calling me. I got an offer from a camp, and I knew nothing about camps, a camp in the Berkshires, Camp Greylock for boys, to be a basketball counselor for $450, which was $50 more than anybody else offered me. And I was interviewed on the phone, on a pay phone, sitting in the hall in my dorm. I thought that's a pretty good idea, but I didn't commit to it for quite a while.
Did you have other options at that time?
Yeah. So what happened, my father came home one day and said, there's an internship at the Pentagon that I think you could be eligible for, that I think I have enough influence to help you get. And it pays about 10 times what this thing called camp pays.
Impressive.
And I needed the money. And I applied for it. But it came around, I guess, late March, early April. I still hadn't heard from the Pentagon. My father called. Turned out the money had not been approved yet. And the camp was putting tremendous pressure on me. So I called my father and I said, what am I supposed to do? He said, well, you got to have a summer job. I don't know about the Pentagon. Take the camp job. So I signed the contract and sent it back. 3 months later, in June, my father's driving me up to camp, and we get to my grandmother's in Queens, where we're going to spend the night before going up to camp. And there's a call from my mother that I had gotten the letter from the Pentagon that the job had come through. And I turned to my father and I said, what am I supposed to do? And this is 50 years ago. I remember it like yesterday, more than 50 years ago. He said, what's the question? You signed the contract. You're going to camp. And I did. And that changed my life. I don't know what my life would have been like if I'd have gone to work in the Pentagon.
But what a lesson about commitment. Once you've given your word to someone, hey, that's gold.
I think it was really about a sense of commitment, but more about integrity, and what your word is worth. And I think that sense of integrity is something, one of the reasons camp appealed to me. It's a place where integrity goes a long way, honesty goes a long way, and I've always tried to live my life like that. But I learned that lesson that afternoon at my grandmother's in Queens, for sure.
That's a great story, great story. And one of those life lessons you try to pass along as you're building better humans through youth camping. And that summer, something happened, I assume, where you got hooked. You saw the camp experience, what camp directors do, what the counselors do, and the young people that benefit from that experience. What was it that got you hooked?
You know, it's a hard question to answer, right? First of all, the fun of it just captured me. It was joyous. It was just joyous, right? There was nothing that wasn't joyous about it. Somebody who came there knowing no one, that the ability to form relationships, close relationships in a community where all that mattered was your character and your ability and your sense of integrity that made you a success. I don't know what to tell you, other than I loved it from the first moment.
It wasn't the comfortable beds or the delicious food.
At Greylock, it was neither, trust me. A boys' camp is usually not known for its food, certainly not in the 60s.
So you had that first experience, and then you came back to camp, and you continued to come back to camp. And in fact, you worked in the camp business for, I think, 15 years or so before you actually became a camp owner. Is that correct?
Yeah, at least 15 years.
What types of jobs did you do in those 15 years?
At Greylock, I was counselor. I was head of the basketball program. I was a division leader. I was a head counselor. Then I became the assistant to the owner. And while I was doing my PhD, after I finished my PhD, and the job market was not great, and I got a terrific offer from wonderful people running camps out of the Philadelphia area for a full-time job, first running one of their boys' camps, and then actually working directly with them. Then I got a job in not-for-profit camping, Jewish camping, for 6 years as an associate director there. So, you know, I had probably 17 years of working for other people. And I learned a lot. I learned my craft then. And that's what I've always felt. I know how to run a camp. I may not know much about anything else, but I learned my craft of what it meant to run a quality camp and how to do it the right way. And I wasn't really in a hurry. I don't think I ever really thought about it in terms of owning a camp.
And when that moment came where you had an opportunity, how does all that come about? So you've clearly done every job I think there probably is to do in 17 years in the camp industry. And then one day, does an opportunity present itself, or does this come to you and you say, this is my time?
No, well, I think serendipity has a fair amount to do with it. Also being sort of mentally prepared for opportunities. But in this case, I was involved with the American Camping Association in New York. I was on the executive board. We met a wonderful couple, Ben and Barbara Applebaum, who we became friends with, Alana and I, and we started going out to dinner with them. And Ben was looking to expand and buy camps. And one day he said to me, how would you like to go into business and we'll buy a day camp? And I said, well, Ben, I don't have any money. He said, well, I have the money. You do the work. We'll be partners. And then he went to my wife, who really in the end made this decision. Alana was teaching. I'd been teaching for 20 years at that point and really wanted a change. And he said, look, if you do this, within 2-3 years, you'll be able to stop teaching. And that was really all Alana had to hear. The bottom line in all of that, we didn't have anything. You know, we had a house. We didn't really have anything to lose. We had 2 kids that we had to feed, right? But we didn't really have anything to lose. And I was not unconfident that I could run a camp. I felt like I had been preparing for it, even though I didn't know I was preparing for it. And I looked back on the people that trained me, particularly Bert Margolis at Greylock. He's no longer alive, but I think somewhere along the way, he must have seen something in me that he was preparing me to be a camp professional. So when the opportunity came, it didn't seem like such a stretch to me, although it was day camp. We didn't know anything about day camping. I'd never been in a day camp, but it was still camping, working with college kids, working with children, creating positive environments. I felt I can probably do this. Did I have any idea we were going to be as successful as we were? No.
Right, you sure have been. And you mentioned Ben Applebaum getting you into that first ownership opportunity there. It sounds like Ben was a great mentor.
So Ben was a mentor to me every day until the day he passed away. And I've been fortunate to have 4 men who've been my mentors, but I would say that Ben and my father have certainly been the most influential on me. And although Ben died now almost over 20 years ago, and my dad over almost 40 years ago, I hear their voices every day. I hear their lessons every day, and I try and live up to the lessons they taught me every day. And we would not be here were it not for those 2 men.
And you mentioned lessons they've taught you, and mentorship, I would assume, is one of those. And you see yourself, I'm sure you do at this point, And you see the importance of others like yourselves being mentors to those coming up.
Yeah, you can't pay it backwards. You can only pay it forwards. And I'm a big believer in that. Today at 3:00, I have a call with a young man who wants to get into the camping world. And I try and give those people time. Now, most of them I see once and they never come back. I guess I scare the hell out of them. But then there are a bunch of them out there who we have trained and helped, along with people like Henry Schreier, who does this also, to get into the camping industry and into the camping world. And I feel very good about that. I do. I think mentorship is really important to do, and values transference. And I was given so much, to not try and pass it on just seems incredibly selfish.
Well, and being in the camp industry yourself and making better humans of young people, I would think that mentorship is certainly part of your overall philosophy of management, if you say so.
Well, we've been yes. I mean, in terms of helping our partners, our young people who we put into business, how to do it, to teach them, to give them everything that we can possibly give them to make them successful is an important part of the world. And I think that one of the challenges today for young people is they're in such a hurry. What I try and get them to do is slow down, take your time, learn your craft. Now, am I right? Well, the way you did it makes you think you're always right? But,
right.
But that's the way I did it. That's the way some of my most successful partners did it. Some were born into the business. Some spent years working for other people. And so that they knew. And I think that there is something about that sense of patience and learning from others and finding people who are go-to people, who are role models for you, that just make you not just a better professional, but a better human being.
And more well-rounded. I mean, you've had 16, 17 years experience before you actually became an owner, which is credibility, a lot of credibility. And you talk about challenges as you've come through your career and through life. Camp is certainly not a business that has been immune from those challenges. The camp industry has been through some tough times too. What are some of those challenges you've had, and how did you migrate your way through those?
Look, we've had a lot of camps, so we have a lot of things happen. We've had several, I can't count the number of recessions. I can't count the 18% interest rates.
Sure.
The injuries. We had a death in one of our camps. These are all things, unfortunately, that happen. I have always tried, number one, to stay calm, to take a deep breath. I had a doctor once who explained to me, unless it's a matter of real life and death, never run to the emergency, walk to the emergency. And I've always tried to think it through before I actually, either for myself, a course of action, or to help someone else. But also I've tried to remain human. So when we had a bus in our early years, a child darted out in front of one of our school buses and we hit that child.
Oh, goodness.
Now, the driver was not ticketed and the police chief said right away it was not our fault. But I went to see that family. The insurance company probably would have said, don't do that.
Right.
Right. But I think at the end of the day, being a human being and doing the right thing in a crisis and keeping your values together helps to get you through. And the knowledge also that you're going to have another day, that it's not the last day of your life, right? The world will come back to some sort of normalcy.
We certainly hope so. It
usually does. It usually does.
You referred back to the 60s, and some people take a look at things today and say, wow, the world is certainly in a difficult place. I just wanted to pause on that for a second, because you're referring back to a time where you, going through school and learning what you learned and observing what happened, particularly back in the late 60s and early 70s. We talk about, challenges that businesses had at the time, coming out of talking about challenges at camp, challenges the world had at the time, if you will, compared to what's happening today. Would you think the knowledge or perspective helps in people realizing that the way things are today don't necessarily just crop up from nowhere? The world has experienced challenges for centuries.
I'm a product of the Vietnam War, of racial prejudice, religious prejudice. I grew up in a small town in the South in the 50s and 60s. Trust me, I know what racial prejudice is. I know what religious prejudice is. I know that things get better, but that the world doesn't move in a straight line. And we go up, we go down. But in general, I'm a big believer in President Obama's comment. The arc of history bends slowly towards justice, right? And I believe that. And I think having been trained as a historian, I think it gives me that perspective to see that. I also have a pretty clear memory. I try not to cloud my memory with nostalgia when it comes to the past.
And, that's the great way to segue into your life's work, as we say, the camp industry, certainly much of your life's work, but the undercurrent that really flows through your career is service to others. And it doesn't stop with, service to youth. It doesn't stop at the camp industry. You're the chair of Hillel International. You've been a leader in the Jewish community for decades. Why is service and giving back so important to you, your work, your family, and what you do?
Well, look, I think, first of all, it makes me a better human being. I don't think it's just a saying, but I get more out of the giving than I get, right, emotionally for me. It obviously fills a need somewhere there. I'm not a psychologist, but it fills a need somewhere in there for me to help others and to do and be involved with others and also to make a difference. And I'm arrogant enough to think at some level, every once in a while, this work that I do does make a difference. And I believe that that's important to do. In some ways, it comes from my religious beliefs that to repair the world, to make the world better is a strong belief in Judaism. And I think I have that in me. It's called Tikkun Olam, repair the world. It matters to me a lot. And the people that it puts me in touch with and the things that enables me to grow and experience make me a better human being. And I've also, I've had the benefit of a family, a wife and children who actually thought it was good for me and actually encouraged me to do it, and partners who, while sometimes they may have thought I was a little crazy that I was spending all this time there, who basically indulged me and helped me along the road. So I've had a lot of positive reinforcement and encouragement in this journey to do things outside of just the business that I'm in.
It's incredible that you were involved in so many organizations. I think I mentioned earlier that if I had to list them all, we'd basically be talking for 30 minutes with nothing but me, reciting your accolades, Skip.
It's because I'm old. I had a lot of years to do it.
Well, you've earned them. But the interesting thing to me is that you're not only involved, you lead. You lead organizations. You lead groups of people. You lead businesses. Why is leadership a role that seems to come so naturally to you, or does it?
I don't know. I mean, it's a really good question, right? My dad was a leader. I think the way you carry yourself, I think that sense of integrity, my willingness to be completely involved certainly has something to do with it. Experience has something to do with it. But I think somewhere along the way, people know that my motivations are appropriate, right? That I'm not looking to do just to feel good, that I want to accomplish something. And I think I'm pretty clear when I'm asked about taking, I won't do it if I don't think that I can lead somewhere that it needs to go. If I can't do that, then it's not for me. I'm not comfortable, and this, I guess, is one of my faults, of which there are many. I'm not comfortable sitting in the back of the bus and just listening. I don't feel that that's a worthwhile use of my time for me. I think people that do that are great, and you need people like that, but it just doesn't work for me.
And leadership takes time, and time takes commitment. You mentioned the importance of your family. You mentioned your wife, Alana. That support structure, is mission critical to anyone who wants to be a leader, I would think. And with Alana particularly, I think it's so unique that you actually met her during your camp experience.
We did.
Is that correct?
We met my first year at a not-for-profit sleepaway camp. The only way I could get her to come back was to marry her. And we spent 6 years there. Alana's never been a huge fan of camp. But Alana has always taken the position that we were strongest when we both had our individual interests that we could pursue and then had our interests that we pursued together. We have followed that now for 44 years of marriage. Seems to be working right now. I don't know about tomorrow. But Alana has her passions and her interests and her leadership roles and things that I really know nothing about, and vice versa. And that seems to work for us. And I think our children appreciate the passion that both of us have for the world that we're in. And somehow, I guess we managed to find time for them too, because they both seem to want to still talk to us.
Well, you've got a beautiful family. You've certainly raised great young men as well. Developing good humans, has been so much of your life's work. You're approaching 50 years or so, plus or minus, involved in camping. I'll say over 45. Fair enough?
Certainly over 45.
When you're at this point in your career and your achievements, Skip, you start thinking about words like, I think of words like things like legacy and succession, those big, big words. You keep a schedule that, and I know because I've been trying to get on your schedule for a while to talk to you, that would make much younger people exhausted. Where do you go next? What's next for Skip Vichness?
I don't know. I don't worry a lot about next in my life. I often say, one of the definitions of history, it's a meandering stream, right? And I feel like in some ways my life is a meandering stream. And I am sure there will be opportunities. I'm looking at some things now, but I know that the one thing that my family has taught me is I do not handle boredom well. And therefore, I am sure there will be some next things, whether there'll be things like taking on a Hillel, which is a major international organization for 4 years. Probably not at this point in life. Something more local, something more scalable. But sitting home and reading a book is not an answer for me.
I would imagine you're someone who has a lot of opportunities presented. Do you feel in your career you've been one that's sought out and looked for those opportunities, or have they come to you once you reach a certain point in your career?
I think in the early days, I was probably pretty aggressive, but I think at some point, not so long after that, I became fairly, I don't know, passive's not the right word, but opportunities came to me. I tell people all the time, when it comes to buying camps, of all the camps we bought, I never called someone and asked me to sell them their camp. Almost in every case, either the broker came to me or the seller came to me and said, would you like to buy my camp? That seemed to have worked out pretty well, that kind of approach for me. And the same thing with leadership positions, about having them presented to me. I don't think I'm just somebody wafting in the wind, because I think when those opportunities do come, I think I'm capable of evaluating whether they make sense for me or not. But I'm not out there aggressively seeking. It has just not been my personality over the years.
Certainly. You know, you once described a young Samuel Vichness as a pretty unsophisticated kid. That's not what I see sitting across from me at this moment. Do you ever imagine that young, unsophisticated kid looking at the career in front of him saying, yeah, that's where I'm headed?
No. No. You would have had to have been of biblical proportions to have that kind of. I think if I had any dream at all when I went off to college or in college, I would be a history professor at some small liberal arts college. I think that was what I thought my future would be. I did not want to be a lawyer. I didn't want that world, but I liked the idea of being a college professor. And for many years, that was the dream. And everything that happened after that, yes, the opportunities presented themselves and I took them, but I had no idea that this was where I was going to end up. I do find it amazing sometimes.
Absolutely. Well, looking back, as we've done over the last several minutes, certainly is an amazing career thus far, I'll say. And I'm excited to see where Skip Vichness, that guy who described himself as a pretty unsophisticated kid, where the next opportunity takes him. I know that I and a lot of others listening will be watching very, very closely. We've been talking with Skip Vichness, entrepreneur and an icon in the children's camp industry. His life's work has really been advocating for young people, building better humans, and he's a leader in the Jewish community as well. Skip, thanks for having us here at your home today in Manhattan.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for Harmony Talk, presented by A.M. Skyer, a third-generation family insurance business started in 1920. I'm Todd Stevens. For everyone out there, keep dreaming and doing.